In Chapter 2, we're going to look at water, biochemistry, and cells. And this begins in your textbook on page 32. So to begin with, we're going to describe the properties that are associated with living things that we've talked about in Chapter 1 already, that science is this big body of knowledge, but in this class we're focusing on the field of biology, which we already know by definition is the study of living organisms. So what qualifies something as living? Well, there are 8 characteristics that your book addresses that define a living thing. So all living things, number 1, have a common set of biological molecules, meaning they're composed of cells. And then from there it builds. We'll look at that more in detail in just a moment. Second characteristic is that living things are going to grow. Third, they're going to move. 4, they're going to reproduce. 5, they're going to respond to external environmental stimuli. 6, they're going to possess something known as metabolism. 7, maintain homeostasis. And then 8, they're going to evolve. So what we want to briefly look at are these 8 characteristics in a little more detail. So to start with, we said that the first characteristic of a living thing was that they had a common set of biological molecules. So we know that every living organism is composed of cells, which is the basic unit of life. So that means if you break down any living thing, their smallest components will be a cell. Now, living things are typically they'll either be unicellular or multicellular. So unicellular, obviously made of just one cell, a single-celled organism. Multicellular, obviously being made of many cells. And so when we say that they're made of a common set of molecules, living organisms can take cells, group them together, and use those to build tissues. They then use tissues to build organs, organs to build organ systems then to actually build an organism. An organism being just another word for a living thing. So if we look at an example of this in our own bodies, we say that living things start out with cells. If you take a group of red cells, red blood cells, and you group them together, you can build cardiac tissue. And if you take a bunch of cardiac tissue and put it together, you can build the heart, the organ, the heart. If you take the organ, the heart, and you add other organs like the lungs and so forth and so on, you can make body systems. And if you take all the body systems, you can make an entire organism like Channing Tatum. So when we say that they're composed of a common set of molecules, again, all living things are built in the same organization. The second characteristic of living things is that living things grow. And when we talk about grow, we refer to building outweighing breaking down. And so there's 2 ways that living things grow. One way is that they increase in the size of their cells, so cells get larger. Another way that we grow is we increase in the number of cells. We know that we all started out as a single-celled zygote. That zygote divided into 2 cells, into 4 cells, into 8 cells, and before you know it, we now consist of trillions of cells. So growth referring to size as well as to number. The third characteristic of a living thing is that living things are going to possess movement. They're going to move. And when we talk about movement, a couple things to consider here. First off, movement is the ability of an organism to just move in general. So we think of, like for us, we have arms and legs. Other organisms have tails. So some type of structure in order to allow us to walk or to run, to move from one location to the next. But we also include in this number 3 movement of individual cells. You're going to learn later on about something called a flagella, which is a tail. We know sperm cells have flagella. Bacterial cells have flagella, and this whip-like tail allows them to move. Other cells have cilia, which are short hairs. Some cells have what are known as pseudopods, or fake feet, all of which move individual cells. This one also refers to moving materials, whether in your cells or between your cells. So our bodies do this mechanism of movement in circulating blood or in absorbing nutrients through the digestive system. So moving materials in and out of cells. A fourth characteristic of living things is that living things are going to reproduce. Now, when we talk about reproduction here, a couple things to consider. First off, there's 2 major types of reproduction. So we have asexual and we have sexual. The asexual involves just one parent cell, and what typically happens with this one parent cell is it makes duplicates of itself. Now, for us, we go through a process of mitosis, and this process of mitosis is where we take one cell and we split it into 2, and we take those 2 cells and we split them to 4. So our bodies use this for both growing as well as to repair cells that have been damaged. For fungus, like mushrooms, they go through a form of asexual reproduction called budding. Plants go through fertilization. Bacteria do binary fission. All of these being examples of asexual reproduction. But we also know that there's a sexual form of reproduction that requires two parent cells that have different genetics. A great example of this that we go through is meiosis. Meiosis is used to produce gametes, like sperm cells and egg cells that go on to produce a zygote. The fifth characteristic of a living thing is that living things are going to respond to environmental stimuli. So stimuli, by definition, a stimulus, they're changes within an environment. And these changes in the environment around us, we then, as a living thing, respond to. So for example, a skunk sprays in response to danger. So what was the stimulus? The stimulus was some form of danger, and how they respond? They sprayed. Deer pausing in response to the headlights of a car, where the stimulus was the headlights of the car. How did the deer respond? They paused. Plants also respond to their environment. Think of something called phototropism, which says plants have a tendency to grow towards the light. So wherever the light is, they're going to grow in that direction. So they're responding to the stimulus, the light. Our pupils respond to light. You know, if we walk into a dark room, how do our pupils respond? They dilate, they get bigger. Or if you walk into a bright light, they're going to get smaller. So living things are constantly going to be responding to the changes that occur around us. The sixth characteristic of a living thing is metabolism. Now, definition of metabolism is it's all the chemical processes that are going on in a cell. And so typically, these chemical processes are either going to fall under the category of anabolism or of catabolism. So anabolism is the synthesis of substances, or in other words, anabolism means to build up. And then catabolism is the breakdown of substances and giving off energy. So metabolism basically is nothing more than breaking materials down just to then build materials back up. And so we know that both of these processes also are going to excrete waste products that our bodies then have to deal with and get rid of. So all living things are going to possess metabolism. They're going to possess these chemical processes that are breaking materials down to build materials up, and it's going to involve energy. The seventh characteristic of a living thing is maintaining homeostasis. Now, definition of homeostasis is it's a constant internal environment. And so as living things, we have an internal environment that has to stay constant. It has to stay pretty much the same. And any variation from those set points typically are going to trigger a response to bring you back to it. So for example, pH. You know, when we talk about pH, we think of things like acids and bases. We know as human beings that our blood has a pretty neutral pH. It's like a 7.3, 7.4. And so our body pH, our blood pH, has to stay pretty constant there. If it gets too high, above 7.4, or too low below it, it can become very dangerous for the human body. So all day long, our body is trying to maintain balance there. We know there is a set point for body temperature, 98.6 degrees. So as our temperature changes, we will sweat to cool us down or shiver to warm us up, trying to maintain balance. There's a balance in water, a balance in carbon dioxide, there's a balance in hunger. So all these levels, living things are trying to balance day in and day out in order to maintain stability and to maintain this constant environment. The eighth characteristic of a living thing is that living things are going to evolve. Now, definition of evolution or to evolve just means to change over time. And so we know for living things are going to change. So the question then is, when we look at those 8 characteristics of living things, do non-living things have any of those characteristics? Does fire have any of those characteristics? Or clouds, rocks, zombies? Do any of those have those characteristics? Well, let's pick, zombies are pretty prominent in television right now. You think of like The Walking Dead and stuff like that. So let's look at the characteristics of living things and compare them to those of zombies. Do they have anything in common? So living things, we said they're going to grow. Zombies, they don't grow. Living things are going to move. Do zombies move? They can move, but they typically don't move as well because of the injuries, but there is movement there. We said that living things are going to reproduce. They're going to pass genetics on to their offspring. Zombies, they don't reproduce. They do not pass on information. Living things, we respond to external stimuli. Zombies, they respond to limited stimuli. Living things are going to metabolize. Zombies don't metabolize. human flesh for nourishment. They just do it in order to kill others. Living things, we maintain balance. Zombies, they have limited homeostatic abilities. So we see some similarities, but between living and non-living, you would not find non-living things meeting all of these characteristics.